The 6th of August, 1945, 8:16 a.m., Tokyo time. Inside the underground operations center of the Japanese Army Ministry, something incredibly strange occurred. Or, to be more accurate, absolutely nothing happened. This was the central nervous system of the entire Japanese Empire. Usually, dozens of telegraph machines would chatter like angry machine guns, 24/7, spitting out ribbons of paper, reports of American carriers sunk here, requests for reinforcements there. The air was perpetually thick with the smell of hot vacuum tubes and heavy cigarette smoke. But at 8:16 a.m., every single line connecting to Hiroshima and Western Japan suddenly went dead. Not one line. All of them. Military phones, civilian telegraphs, even the railway signaling system instantly zeroed out. For the signalman at the console, his first reaction wasn't fear. What would you have thought? Would you assume an entire city had been physically erased in a split second? Impossible. No one in that era had that kind of imagination. Their first reaction was anger. The duty officer grabbed the phone and roared, cursing the communications officer in Hiroshima for likely slacking off again, or blaming some stupid engineer for cutting the main cable. In the logic of the Imperial General Headquarters, a malfunction was a far more reasonable explanation than annihilation. To confirm the situation, they sent a young pilot to fly over Hiroshima and take a look. The order was casual, as simple as telling someone to go to the corner store for a pack of cigarettes. The commander told him, "Go see what's wrong with the lines and write a report when you get back." 3 hours later, when that plane was still 100 miles from Hiroshima, the pilot saw a sight that would shatter his mind forever. Where a city should have been, there was now a massive, roiling white cloud, tens of miles in diameter. No streets, no castles, no arsenals. On the ground, there was only a gigantic burning scar. Trembling, the pilot radioed back, "Hiroshima has vanished." But even with this eyewitness report, when the news reached the massive green felt table at the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo, it failed to register. The old men with gold stars on their shoulders, the elite who held the lives of millions in their hands, looked at the report and delivered a suffocating conclusion. This is American propaganda. It must be some kind of special bomb, or the pilot made a mistake. Someone even slammed the table and shouted, "Do not be cowed by the enemy's tricks." You see, this is the story we are telling today. This isn't just a story about the atomic bomb. It isn't even just a story about defeat. This is the ultimate experiment in how human beings deceive themselves. In the 9 days that followed, the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo would stage the most absurd battle for cognitive preservation in human history. Faced with a truth that had already physically crushed them, these high IQ madmen used layers of meetings, approvals, bureaucratic jargon, and lies to construct a massive information cocoon called the headquarters. They didn't lack the truth. They rejected the truth, because in this system, admitting reality was more terrifying than death itself. Chapter 1. Prisoners of the Comfort Zone, the Corrupted Code. To understand the madness of August 1945, we must first look at what virus had infected their brains. The name of this virus was Imperial General Headquarters Announcements, Daihane Hapyo. In late war Japan, this wasn't just a term for a press conference, it was an administrative drug. Imagine you are a frontline staff officer in 1944. The reality before you is bleak. American planes blot out the sun, your comrades are starving, and your rifles have no bullets. You need to write a combat report to your superiors. If you write, "Our army is crushed, requesting retreat," your report will never leave the tent. Your superior will call you in, slap you across the face, call you a traitor, a coward who shakes the morale of the troops. In this system, the word defeat does not exist. It is contraband. So, you learn to be smart. You rewrite total annihilation as Gyokusai, shattered jewel. Doesn't that sound tragic and beautiful? Like cherry blossoms falling. You rewrite fleeing in panic as strategic turning movement. Doesn't that sound like a profound tactical maneuver? These words were reported up layer by layer. By the time it reached the division commander, turning became successfully engaging the enemy and shifting positions. By the time it reached the war room in Tokyo, the report became, "Our forces inflicted heavy damage on the Americans in this region and are now executing a grand strategic deployment using this location as bait." Do you understand? This is reverse alchemy for information. They turned excrement into gold. By October 1944, this alchemy reached its peak. In the famous Formosa air battle, Japanese naval pilots, lacking training, mistook the glare of waves and the shadows of clouds in the dark for American aircraft carriers. They returned, excitedly reporting, I sank one too. The headquarters didn't verify it, or rather, they needed good news so badly, like a junkie needing a hit of heroin. So Tokyo Radio announced to the world, the Imperial Japanese Navy has achieved an unprecedented victory, sinking 11 American aircraft carriers and 2 battleships. Tokyo streets erupted. Lantern parades. 3 cheers for the emperor. Even the emperor issued a commendation. But what was the truth? The truth was the U.S. lost only 2 cruisers. Their main force was untouched. At that very moment, the famous American Admiral, Bull Halsey, was leading his massive fleet, which had supposedly been annihilated like a ghost toward Leyte Gulf. And the Japanese headquarters? They actually believed their own lie. Thinking the U.S. Navy was crippled, they launched the Showan operation, gambling the last of the Japanese Navy, charging into Leyte Gulf to mop up the American remnants. The result was predictable. When the Japanese fleet broke through the morning mist and saw the ocean covered with pristine American carrier groups, you can imagine the look on the commanders' faces. It wasn't fear. It was the collapse of a worldview. Weren't they all sunk in the newspapers? Why has this ship resurrected? Why is that one here too? This was daily life at the headquarters. The system was like a computer stuck in a boot loop because of a virus. Subordinates fabricated data to save their lives. Superiors polished data to save their careers. The top brass used these lies as the foundation for national strategy to protect the dignity of the divine. By August 1945, this bubble had grown to unimaginable proportions. On the top-secret spreadsheets of the headquarters, the number of U.S. ships sunk by Japan was double what the American steel mills could even produce. If the data were true, the U.S. Navy should have been fighting in canoes by now. But the reality was B-29 bombers burning Japanese cities to ash every single day. Massive cognitive dissonance tortured everyone. What to do? Simple. Keep lying. As long as I don't admit it, it doesn't exist. As long as we all close our eyes, the American fleet is a hallucination, the atomic bomb is propaganda, and the Soviets are our best friends. Until that day on August 6, when a light brighter than 1,000 suns forcibly pried their eyelids open. But even then, as we saw in the beginning, their first reaction was to try and stitch their eyelids back together. Chapter 2. The Art of Denial, the Conventional Mushroom Cloud. If the previous story was about burying one's head in the sand, what happened on the night of the 6th of August, 1945, was mass hysteria. Hiroshima was leveled. This wasn't a rumor, it was a fact. Japan's top nuclear physicist, Dr. Yoshio Nishina, was urgently summoned to the headquarters. The military tossed him a statement just released by President Truman, which read, "We have dropped an atomic bomb with the power of 20,000 tons of TNT." The generals gathered around the frail scientist, their eyes full of expectation. But they weren't expecting the truth. They were expecting the scientist to tell them, "This is fake too. The Americans are bluffing." Nishina looked at the report, his hands trembling. As a scientist, he knew perfectly well that conventional explosives couldn't wipe a city flat in an instant. He whispered, "If this is true, we have lost in physics. We cannot fight this war." Guess what the headquarters reaction was? A high-ranking Navy official stood up and said, "I don't believe it. American technology couldn't have advanced this fast. If this really is an atomic bomb, it must be a crude, complex, experimental device. They surely only have this one." The Army's reaction was more direct. They even banned the use of the term atomic bomb in official documents. They invented a new term, new type special bomb. This is the art of denial. As long as I don't name it, it isn't that scary. As long as I assume it's a unique item of which they only have one, I still have the chips to keep gambling. For the next 48 hours, an absurd argument raged in Tokyo's conference rooms. While survivors in Hiroshima, skin melting, wandered the ruins like ghosts, the decision-makers in Tokyo were splitting hairs over vocabulary. The focus of their argument wasn't how to save people, nor how to cut losses, but how to describe this devastating strike in tomorrow's newspapers as a minor tactical setback. They even started calculating, if the Americans have very little uranium, their next bomb won't be ready for at least 6 months. 6 months is enough time for us to have a glorious final battle on the mainland. This gambler's fallacy is atrocious. They bet the lives of tens of millions of citizens on a completely fictional statistical assumption. They bet the Americans were out of stock. They bet the Americans lacked productivity. Unfortunately, they forgot that in this world, there is a force more terrifying than spirit, and that is the industrial assembly line. Just as they were arguing endlessly, on the other side of the Pacific, on Tinian Island, American ground crews were running final checks on the second atomic bomb, Fat Man. Behind it, components for a third and a fourth were being crated up and shipped from American factories. The Japanese headquarters thought they were fighting an army. In reality, they were fighting an entire modern industrial civilization. And when one tries to use a spiritual atomic bomb to fight a real physical atomic bomb, the result is destined to be catastrophic. Chapter 3. Diplomatic Hallucination. A Love Letter to Stalin. If the atomic bomb was a physical death sentence, then the Japanese headquarters' diplomatic maneuvers were a self-imposed, suspended sentence, followed by personally tying the noose around their own necks. By the 8th of August, 1945, 2 days after Hiroshima, the Japanese leadership actually believed they had one last card to play. Or rather, they hallucinated that they had a card. That card was named the Soviet Union. At the time, the Japanese headquarters was trapped in a state of frantic, unrequited love. Their logic went like this: the Americans are too savage. They want to exterminate us. But the Soviets are different. The Soviets signed a neutrality pact with us. And surely, the Soviets don't want to see America dominate the Pacific alone. Therefore, the Soviets will definitely help us. This was the most childish joke in the history of international politics. The Japanese Foreign Ministry began frantically telegraphing their ambassador in Moscow, Naotake Sato. In these cables, later intercepted and decoded by the U.S. military, we can see a suffocating desperation. Tokyo instructed the ambassador, "Go see Stalin, go see the high officials in Moscow. Tell them Japan is willing to pay a huge price. We'll give them rights in Manchuria, it doesn't matter. Just get the Soviets to mediate so we can end the war with dignity." Ambassador Sato was a sober man. In his replies, he practically begged Tokyo, "Wake up, the Soviets are moving tanks to the border. They don't want to mediate, they want a piece of the pie." But the Tokyo headquarters turned a deaf ear. Like a girl deceived by a con artist, they firmly believed that if the dowry was rich enough, he would change his mind. The most ironic scene unfolded. Late at night on August 8th, Tokyo time afternoon in Moscow, the Japanese ambassador finally received notice from Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov that he would see him. Tokyo rejoiced. They thought, finally, the Soviets are willing to listen to our terms. We caught the last straw. Ambassador Sato walked into Molotov's office, a polite smile on his face. But before he could even open his mouth to present the prepared mediation proposal, Molotov coldly cut him off and handed him a piece of paper. Sato thought it was a draft of the armistice. He took it with trembling hands and read the first line. It wasn't a mediation offer. It was a declaration of war. Molotov said expressionlessly, "As of tomorrow, the Soviet Union and Japan are in a state of war. Thousands of kilometers away on the Manchurian border, 1.5 million Soviet troops and 5,000 tanks started their engines. That was the sound of a steel flood, the sound of the final nail being driven into the coffin of the Japanese Empire. At this very moment, the Tokyo headquarters was still eagerly awaiting good news from Moscow. They didn't know that the mediator they pinned their hopes on wasn't holding an olive branch, but a freshly sharpened butcher's knife. This is the price of an information cocoon. When you only believe what you want to believe, reality will stab you in the back with the cruelest knife of all. Chapter 4. The Iron Fist of Data. When Admiral Toyota saw the spreadsheet, if Hiroshima on August 6 was a heavy punch, then August 9 was the lethal combo that put the Japanese Empire into the ICU. At 11:02 a.m. that day, the second atomic bomb exploded over Nagasaki. Almost simultaneously, the Soviet tank flood broke through the Kwantung Army's defense lines. In the underground bunker in Tokyo, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The fanaticism for a final battle began to fade, replaced by a despair that seeped into the marrow. This despair wasn't about the fear of death, it was about the math not adding up. Even the most stubborn hardliners, like the chief of the Navy General Staff, Admiral Soimu Toyota, finally had to face a document he had been avoiding. It was an intelligence assessment regarding American industrial capacity. When the war began, the Japanese Navy mocked the Americans as merchants afraid of death, believing that while they had money, they had no soul. The Japanese military believed that sinking a few carriers would make these pampered American boys run home crying. But now, the data in front of Admiral Toyota showed America wasn't just rich. America was a fully awakened industrial monster. The data showed that in just the past 2 years, the U.S. had churned out dozens of Essex-class aircraft carriers like dumplings. Their shipyards ran 24 hours a day, 3 shifts, lights blazing, producing warships like sausages on an assembly line. What suffocated the Japanese leadership even more was another figure, the Manhattan Project. Japanese experts estimated that the U.S. invested at least $2 billion to create these 2 bombs. What is $2 billion? That number exceeded the entire national war budget of the Japanese Empire for the year 1944. Do you understand? This wasn't a war of samurai swords versus bayonets. This was a war between a beggar and a tycoon. The pocket change the Americans spent just to run an experimental weapon program was more than all the money Japan could scrape together as a nation in a year. In the face of absolute financial power, the so-called Yamato spirit, the so-called shattered jewel spirit, appeared so pale and weak. Admiral Toyota slumped in his chair. He realized that all their previous strategies, the plan for a decisive battle on the mainland, were like trying to stop a speeding bullet train with a bamboo spear. This wasn't war. This was suicide. And it was meaningless, exorbitantly expensive suicide. Finally, the spiritual atomic bomb that had sustained them burned out. In that smoke-filled conference room, these white-haired old men finally admitted in their hearts the fact they had avoided for 4 years. We are fighting a civilization from a different dimension. We have lost. We have lost everything. Chapter 5. Seppuku and the Broadcast. The Final System Crash. The 14th of August, 1945. The final moment arrived. On the last of these 9 days, all lies were bankrupt, all fantasies shattered. There was only one thing left: how to shut down the system with dignity. In the Palace Air Raid Shelter, the final Imperial Conference was underway. Emperor Showa, the man viewed as a god, finally stood up. With tears in his eyes, he spoke those famous words: "I cannot bear to see my people suffer any longer. I must endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable." The decision was made. Accept the Potsdam Declaration, unconditional surrender. But for War Minister Anami Korechika, this decision was worse than death. Anami was a typical Japanese soldier. It wasn't that he didn't know they couldn't win, but he represented the face of millions of soldiers. Surrendering meant admitting that decades of militaristic education were all a scam. After the meeting, Anami returned to the Ministry of War. He knew that as one of the main figures responsible for this disaster, as the highest commander of the army, he had to give this system an answer. In the early hours of August 15, Anami put on his white dress uniform, draped with medals. He faced the direction of the Imperial Palace and knelt. He drew his short sword and sliced open his abdomen. In extreme agony, he even called for the staff officer waiting outside to help him with the kaishaku, the finishing stroke. But the final words he left behind were thought-provoking. In the past, he would have written, "Long live the Emperor," or "Serve the country for 7 lives." Instead, he wrote, "I died to apologize for a great crime." Who was he apologizing to? The Emperor? The people? Perhaps he was apologizing for the country destroyed by his generation, for the imperial skyscraper built on countless lies that finally collapsed. Hours later, at noon on August 15, through the crackling static, a slightly high-pitched male voice came out of radios across Japan. It was the voice of Emperor Showa. This was the first time in Japanese history that commoners heard the voice of God. The voice didn't sound like a god. It sounded like a tired, middle-aged man reading an obscure script. Although the script used complex, archaic language and didn't even directly use the word surrender, everyone understood. The war was over. No more dying. No need to believe the lies about 11 aircraft carriers sunk anymore. Silence fell over the ruins of Tokyo. People stood dazed in the streets, looking at their devastated homes. It was a massive sense of emptiness. They suddenly realized they had been led so far down the garden path, like fools by that machine called the headquarters, paying such a painful price, only to end with the shattering of an illusion. This was the final 9 days of Japan in August 1945. The most profound lesson it leaves for humanity is perhaps not the power of the atomic bomb. It is that when an organization or a nation begins to substitute truth with lies and logic with emotion, it is only one step away from hell.